Forget everything you think you know about staying warm in winter, because right now, historians are studying how mountain men survived negative 40-degree temperatures without a single fire, and they stayed warmer than you with your smart thermostat, 0 matches, 0 lighters, 0 flames. Just engineering so sophisticated that modern survival schools teach it backwards. The methods they used are so counterintuitive that REI sells expensive gear trying to replicate what these men did with materials found lying around. But here's what nobody's asking. How does a human body generate enough heat to survive a Montana winter when fire isn't an option? Caribou hide. That's the secret nobody talks about. Not just any animal skin, specifically caribou, and here's why it matters. Each guard hair is hollow. Completely hollow. These microscopic air tubes create thousands of tiny insulation chambers that trap warmth better than anything else walking around the North American wilderness. A caribou hide blanket provides roughly the same R value as a modern 20-degree sleeping bag. That's serious insulation from something you can hunt, but not all hides work the same way. Deer hide, for instance, has solid hair shafts, still provides warmth, sure, but you'd need 3 deer hides to match 1 caribou hide's performance. Rabbit fur is even worse. Dense and soft, feels warm to touch, but compresses flat under body weight. Once compressed, those air pockets collapse. No trapped air means no insulation. Basic physics. Mountain men figured this out through trial and error that sometimes killed people. The veterans, the ones who survived multiple winters, they knew exactly which animals to prioritize. Accounts from Hudson Bay Company traders in the 1780s described trappers refusing to trade perfectly good beaver pelts because they were holding out for caribou. That's how valuable the right materials were. Here's the technique that separates amateurs from people who actually lived this way. Layering matters more than thickness. 1 hide against your skin, fur side in. Traps the heat your body generates. 2nd hide on top, fur side out. Blocks wind and snow. Dead airspace between the 2 layers does the actual insulating work. Same principle as double-pane windows, except this version has been working since before glass existed. The science is dead simple. Air conducts heat poorly. Terrible at it, actually. Still, air provides an R value of roughly 1 per inch of thickness. That's why down jackets work, why insulation foam works, why these hides worked. Trapped air is nature's thermal underwear. Now, here's something most people don't realize. A single caribou hide weighs about 8 pounds. Heavy, but manageable. 2 hides for proper layering means you're carrying 16 pounds of bedding. My grandfather used to joke that modern backpackers lose their minds over a 2-pound sleeping bag when trappers hauled double that and stayed warmer. He wasn't wrong, but caribou weren't everywhere. Rocky Mountain trappers, Great Basin wanderers, men working territories without caribou herds, they needed alternatives. That's where natural fiber stuffing comes in. Cattail down, the fluffy seed material from those brown hot dog-shaped plants growing in every marsh. Milkweed fluff, dried sphagnum moss. These materials trap air just like hollow caribou hair, except you gather them instead of hunting them. Cattail down is surprisingly effective. A 2-inch layer provides insulation comparable to modern synthetic fill, completely free, available from September through November, before winter scatters the seeds. 1 productive marsh yields enough material to stuff a sleeping bag in about 3 hours of gathering. Athabascan peoples in Alaska used this technique for centuries before trappers copied it. The process is simple but specific. Harvest when fully dried on the stalk. Never gather wet cattails. The moisture ruins everything. Spread the down in thin layers to finish drying. Takes about a week in decent weather. Then stuff it between 2 hides or into a cloth sack. You've basically built a primitive down comforter. Milkweed fluff works even better in some ways. Lighter than cattail down, almost as buoyant as goose down. The problem is availability. Milkweed pods only produce fluff for a narrow window in late summer. Miss that window and you're waiting another year. But trappers working regular territories knew exactly where the milkweed patches grew and timed their roots accordingly. Here's the catch. Always is, right? Moisture destroys all of this instantly. Wet caribou hide loses about 90% of its insulating power. Wet cattail down clumps into useless mush. A single night of heavy sweating or a dunking in a river could mean the difference between sleeping warm and dying of hypothermia. Mountain men obsessed over keeping bedding dry more than almost anything else. They developed specific protocols. Never sleep in the same clothes you wore during the day. Day clothes absorb sweat. Sleeping in them transfers moisture to your bedding. Always air out hides and stuffing whenever the sun shows up. Even in winter, a few hours of sunlight and dry air can save moisture-damaged materials. Smart trappers carried their bedding wrapped in leather or oiled canvas. Extra weight, but worth it. One Missouri River explorer's journal from 1834 describes watching his partner's bedding freeze solid overnight after getting soaked crossing a stream. The man nearly died. His companion's dry bedding, carefully protected, saved both their lives by sharing it. But insulation only works if your body produces heat to trap. What happens when you're so cold, so calorie depleted, that your furnace barely generates warmth? That's where the next method gets interesting, because mountain men figured out how to turn their bodies into heating systems that would make metabolic scientists jealous. Your body burns roughly 2,000 calories a day sitting at a desk doing nothing. That's baseline metabolism. Now put that same body in negative 20-degree weather for 12 hours. Suddenly you're burning 5,000 to 6,000 calories, just maintaining core temperature. That's triple your normal fuel consumption. And if you don't replace those calories, your internal furnace starts shutting down. Simple as that. Mountain men understood this math instinctively. They didn't count calories or track macros, but they knew exactly what kept them warm. Fat, specifically animal fat consumed in quantities that would horrify modern nutritionists. Bear fat, beaver tail, as a buffalo marrow. A winter diet averaged 70% fat by weight, 30% protein, almost zero carbohydrates. Here's why that ratio matters. Fat provides 9 calories per gram. Protein and carbs only provide 4, but the real advantage isn't calorie density. It's burn rate. Your body metabolizes fat slowly, releasing heat steadily over 6 to 8 hours. Carbohydrates burn fast and hot. Then you're cold again within 2 hours. It's the difference between hardwood logs and newspaper in a fireplace. Pemmican became the gold standard for exactly this reason. Dried meat pounded into powder, mixed with rendered fat at a 1-to-1 ratio, sometimes with dried berries added. 1 pound of pemmican contains roughly 2,500 calories. Compact, doesn't spoil, and provides sustained metabolic heat that lasts through a full night's sleep. The Lewis and Clark's expedition consumed over 800 pounds of it, crossing the Rockies in winter. But here's where timing becomes critical. Most people eat when they're hungry. Mountain men ate strategically. A massive high-fat meal 2 hours before sleep meant your body spent the entire night digesting and generating heat. Thermogenesis, the scientific term for heat produced during digestion, can raise your core temperature by 1 to 2 degrees for 6 to 8 hours straight. That's a biological space heater running all night on food you already needed to eat anyway. The catch is getting enough fat in the first place. A beaver tail yields maybe 4 ounces of pure fat. You'd need to trap 20 beavers a week just to maintain one person's winter fat requirements. Bear hunting in fall, before hibernation when they're fattened up, became essential. One 400-pound black bear provides roughly 100 pounds of harvestable fat. That's survival fuel for a month or more. Now, even with perfect nutrition and insulation, you're still losing heat to the environment. That's where shelter engineering separates people who survived from people who died. And the principles they used are so counterintuitive that modern campers get them wrong constantly. Small shelters beat large shelters every time. A space just big enough to lie down in, maybe 4 feet wide by 7 feet long by 3 feet tall. Your exhaled breath contains carbon dioxide. In a tiny enclosed space, CO2 concentrations can hit 3 to 5% of total air volume. That's high enough to make you drowsy, suppress your breathing reflex, and raise your perceived temperature by 8 to 12 degrees through atmospheric density changes. Sounds dangerous, right? It is, but mountain men managed this risk carefully. They positioned shelters with the entrance facing away from prevailing winds. Then they left a deliberate gap, usually a 2-inch crack along the top seam or near the door. Enough ventilation to prevent lethal CO2 buildup, not enough to create a draft that strips away heat. The physics is surprisingly elegant. Cold air is denser than warm air, sinks to the ground naturally. So they slept on elevated platforms, even just 6 inches of packed brush or stacked bark. That thin layer of cold air settles below you. The warmer, CO2-rich air stays at breathing level. Your body heat stratifies the shelter atmosphere into distinct temperature zones without any mechanical help. Site selection mattered as much as construction. Never camp in valley bottoms where cold air pools. Never camp on exposed ridges where wind shreds your shelter. The sweet spot is 50 to 100 feet, upslope from a valley floor, tucked behind natural windbreaks like boulder fields or dense tree clusters. Temperature differences between good sites and bad sites regularly measured 15 to 20 degrees, even when they were only 200 feet apart. Now here's where things get genuinely weird. Snow. The stuff you think of as cold. Turns out snow is one of the best insulators mountain men had access to, and the shelters they built using it defied every assumption people make about surviving winter. Snow has an R value of roughly 1 per inch of thickness. That's the same insulating power as fiberglass batting. Sounds impossible, right? But the science is solid. Fresh snow is about 90 to 95% trapped air, and trapped air, as we've established, is nature's insulation. A properly built snow shelter with 12-inch walls provides an R value of 12. That's better than most modern tents. Here's where it gets counterintuitive. Outside temperature drops to -40. Inside a snow cave, the temperature stabilizes at exactly 32 degrees. Always. Doesn't matter if it's -10 or -60 outside. Inside hovers right at freezing. That's a 72-degree temperature difference created by nothing but snow and basic physics. The construction technique matters enormously. You don't hollow out existing snowdrifts. Too unstable. A risk of collapse. Instead, you pile fresh snow into a mound, let it sinter for 2 to 3 hours. Sintering is when snow crystals bond together under their own weight. Makes the structure solid enough to carve without collapse. Then, you tunnel in from the side, hollow out the interior, leave walls 10 to 12 inches thick minimum. Critical detail, the sleeping platform must sit higher than the entrance tunnel. Cold air sinks, remember? So you build an elevated bench inside. Cold air pools in the entrance tunnel and stays there. You sleep in the warm layer. Temperature difference between the platform and the tunnel floor can hit 15 to 20 degrees in the same 8-foot space. Inuit peoples perfected this thousands of years ago. Mountain men learned it from them, adapted it, spread the knowledge through trapping communities. One 1843 journal entry from a Snake River trapper describes surviving a 3-day blizzard in a snow shelter with temperatures outside hitting -55. Inside, he melted snow for drinking water, using nothing but body heat. That's how effective these structures are. But there's a catch. Always is, right? Carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide buildup. You need a ventilation hole, pencil-sized, punch through the roof. Too small and you suffocate, too large and you lose all your heat. Finding that balance killed people who got it wrong. Now here's the method that makes modern people uncomfortable but saved more lives than any other single technique. Communal sleeping, 3 to 4 people crammed into a space barely big enough for one. Body-to-body contact, 0 personal space, because your body produces roughly 100 watts of heat constantly. Put 4 people together and you've got a 400-watt heater running all night. No fuel required. The math is undeniable. See, 4 people in a 6 by 8 foot shelter raise the interior temperature by 25 to 30 degrees through body heat alone. That's the difference between surviving and freezing. Antarctic explorers figured this out independently in the early 1900s. Mountain men knew it 80 years earlier. When it's -30 outside, nobody cares about personal space. You spoon or you freeze. Simple as that. Dogs weren't just companions in winter camps. They were biological heaters. A dog's normal body temperature runs 101 to 102 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 3 to 4 degrees warmer than a human. Sleeping with two dogs meant an extra 200 watts of heat, plus the insulation value of their fur. Smart trappers treated their dogs better than themselves for exactly this reason. Horses served the same function on a larger scale. A 1,000-pound horse generates roughly 1,500 watts of body heat. Trappers would build shelters directly adjacent to where horses bedded down, using shared walls. The horse's body heat radiates through the wall all night, free heating that never runs out as long as you keep the animal fed. This is desperate genius at work, taking every available heat source and engineering a survival system from materials and biology. No romance in it, just cold calculation about what keeps you alive. But here's the thing that killed more mountain men than anything else: not cold, not starvation, moisture, specifically sweat. Your body releases roughly 1 liter of water vapor every night through breathing and perspiration. In extreme cold, managing that moisture becomes more critical than generating heat. Because wet insulation is worse than no insulation. Way worse. The technique veterans used seems backwards at first. Remove layers before you start sweating during exertion. Most people wait until they feel hot. Too late. By then you're already damp. The moisture wicks into your insulation, and now you're carrying wet weight that will freeze solid the moment you stop moving. Modern Gore-Tex and waterproof breathable fabrics try to solve this with technology. Mountain men solved it with discipline. Strip down to base layers before chopping wood. Air out all bedding every single day, even in blizzards. Never sleep in clothes you wore during the day. These rules kept people alive, when breaking them meant death within hours. My grandfather learned these techniques hunting in Montana winters. His grandfather learned them from trappers working the Yellowstone country in the 1880s. 3 generations of the same knowledge, proving itself reliable. The principles haven't changed because physics hasn't changed. Modern wilderness survival courses teach these methods now. Military cold weather training incorporates them, but somehow the average person with their down jacket and chemical hand warmers doesn't realize they're using techniques that fur trappers engineered 200 years ago, just packaged differently. Mountain men didn't survive winter without fire through toughness or desperation. They survived through engineering, material science, thermodynamics, biology, meteorology, all applied with precision that would impress any modern expert. These weren't primitive survivors. They were specialists operating in conditions that still kill people today, despite centuries of technological advancement.